Earlier in the year, I talked about the Waggle, and in fact, earlier today, put up another video on TikTok about the Waggle, in particular referencing, as I've been doing recently, this wonderful and iconic book from Ben Hogan, The Modern Fundamentals. And in chapter 3, which he calls the first part of the swing, the backswing, the first part of that chapter is devoted to quite a bit of detail about how to waggle. Now, the waggle is this sort of fidgety motion that you see golfers go through, some of them to the degree that it drives you a little nuts. So he didn't think that it was just about relaxing the muscles. He thought it was perhaps certainly to do with alerting them to impending deployment. And he thought it important and not one size fits all. You should match it to the circumstances. A high feathered iron shot landing on a green would require a more languid waggle than the waggle appropriate for trying to dart a ball into a stiff breeze with a driver. So he got into some of the details about how the wrist should operate with the waggle. Now, it's interesting because the modern player doesn't use the wrists in their waggle. There's one player, Jason Duffner, who does it the old-fashioned way. And certainly the people who were around Ben Hogan at the time were doing the old traditional wristy waggle. Nowadays, they do it the way I've advocated in the past, which is that it's a wooden movement where the shaft of the club is actually like a windshield wiper blade, cleaning a little piece of the windshield. And you see modern champions doing it that way all the time, with only the exception of Jason Duffner. So back to the wrist. Ben Hogan thought that the left wrist was particularly important, that as you waggled, the left wrist would move to the left. And then it got a little bit sort of quirky because he also thought that as you did the forward movement of the waggle, back to the ball, that the wrist would move to the left again. I've never been able to read that in a way that was helpful. So it then brings up the next question, which is if it's a wrist thing, which wrist? If it's the right wrist that's the pivot, then the left hand and arm are pulled down and forward, somewhat the way that he advocated. If the left wrist is the hinge, then the right one is pushed up and toward the hip. And of course, he advocated that that elbow hit the hip. So it got a little murky in there. And so while he was performing the waggle, he noted that the left arm would actually rotate out away from the body and a few degrees to the right, and that the right elbow would drop down and touch the hip. Now, I think that this is quite meaningful. Ben Hogan, in his early years on the tour, was beleaguered by a hook, a ball that goes hard left in a very inconvenient way. And it's characteristic of many good golfers, especially in their formative years. He did much work. He was noted for his work ethic on eliminating that from the equation. And I think that that was where his recommendations about the disposition of the elbows comes from, where the elbows look at their respective hips. For most people, as you've heard me discuss in other videos, having the left elbow looking down, which is not how modern champions do it, leaves one with the tendency to roll the arm to the right. The danger is the club is open, low inside, and likely to slice. And in his case, it was a benefit. Now, for the rest of the world, having a wrist action, the waggle, associated with the left arm lifting and turning to the right is a very Hogan-esque thing, because the modern champion, they don't do a wristy waggle anymore, but they do the wooden one, and it's maintaining the shapes of their left shoulder, arm, wrist, and club. And Hogan, of course, talked about how important it was that this showed you how to start the backswing, and also, by the way, how to get the club back square to the ball. He recommended that a big benefit of the waggle was that it showed you how the club was going to square up on the way down. So in my case, quirkily for the last 50 years, I do a wristy waggle to begin and then a wooden one. And just sort of interesting that there's a sort of an evolution and a fashion associated with that. So with the wristy waggle that Ben Hogan advocated, his arm turned and then he brought it back to the ball, and he thought that this was a great benefit. I would suggest that biasing the arm, doing a wooden waggle, and then moving the feet in the way that he noted is probably the better way to go. Why I mention that is because in his book he recommended that there were lots of small little fidgety movements when the people around him were waggling. I know it's characteristic of the wristy one, but even with the wooden one that I advocate, you'll notice that as the waggle is performed, there's a little sort of tabby cat sitting down kind of padding of the feet back and forth, and it's a fine tune of your distance and weight distribution, which is tremendously beneficial for your golf. So we'll talk more about the waggle, but this is a good start.